Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Karina from the Matura Express, and the topic we're going to talk about today is schools. Oh. You just saw this very nice multicolored background instead of the usual pictures that you get. But anyway, so because there was no stream last week, all the topics kind of got a bit mixed up. So I decided to have a two-in-one basically. I will tonight try and cover point B, so changes in school. What is different now in a school to your parents' generation, for example. I will give you some general information. Very good. I will give you some general information on schools in general, things that I think that your book doesn't really make that clear, or stuff that I think is necessary for next week, because next week it will be time for the trial exams. In the trial exams we will cover, I will try and cover as many aspects as I can. So today you get some vocabulary on the topic of schooling and going to school and the different types of school. So that's point A. So you need vocabulary. So what is important? What is the basic toolkit that you need for talking about schools? Some changes in schools, as I already mentioned. Some general information that's just, as I said, simply stuff that I thought was kind of interesting. And then this is what the picture, what the insert in the beginning said. How to anticipate questions for the dialogue, some tips. In case you don't know the word anticipate is kind of something you don't really know, but you have a vague idea of what the examiner could ask you based on some clues or based on some proof. Anticipate means something like voraussehen, vorausahnen kind of thing. So I will try and give you some tips on how to make some educated guesses on what the examiner could ask you in the dialogue part. So we are talking about the dialogue part tonight, because the monologue part is more or less evident. You just have to work through your bullet points basically. But in the dialogue it's all a bit more, well, preparing for the dialogue is harder, I guess, at the end of the day. So let's see what we have. I guess the first word sometimes does cause some confusion, because not every country within Europe does have the Matura as a concept as we do. America doesn't either. So I always find it difficult to explain what it really is. I think the word that we most frequently use are the A-levels. The Americans very frequently say something like university entrance exams, because that's what you can do afterwards, really. So you need to pass an exam in order to be able to attend college. So that would work as well, but I think for your Matura, for your oral exams, you can just simply call it A-levels or Matura. There's people out there who accept Matura as well, simply for the fact that there's no equivalent, really. I collected all of the words out of the book that most of you are using, or especially those of you who are doing the A-levels in the course of Lehre mit Matura or Berufsreife course. So also the word Internat came up in several contexts, because, well, Internate are comparably more frequent in England than they are in Austria, I suppose. Not many people I know did go to an Internat, but as I said, it's more frequent in England, and that's what it is. Boarding school, and the people who live in an internat are usually called the boarders. So that's the people who can't go home from school, they can't go back and forth. They have to stay there from Monday to Friday, go home on the weekend or not. There was a time, especially in England, where people would only go home during their holidays. That was a while ago, I guess, depending on where you live, really. I went to school in England for a year. This school was a boarding school, which was kind of quite cool, because you'd always have sports activities and stuff. which is quite nice. That is a big difference between England and Austria. I think in Austria the boarding schools don't offer that much of free time activities, or at least the ones I know don't. In England, boarding school basically means that you study together with your peers, but you also do sports together. You're kind of forced to either join a sports club or join, I don't know, reading club, whatever. So that's what people in boarding schools would usually do. Swindlen, which is I hope you never do. To cheat in school, to cheat in subjects, to cheat in exams. That's what, yes, with a spelling mistake, that's what most people, well, that's the most classic form of cheating, I guess. Nowadays, I was told by a student of mine that there's way more modern versions of cheating out there, or means to be able to cheat, kind of. So that's the good old Schwindelzettel, I think, as we call it. Again, a difference more so in England. I think there's a big difference, or there is more. There are Pflichtfächer, of course, you always have them. But I think in other countries, or at least the ones that I know of, you have a wider, like bigger choice of Wahlfächer or Nebenfächer. They are not as popular in Austria. I think per school you have one or two like subjects that are not, you know, main subjects, but you can kind of choose like according to your preferences. Again, more of a choice in England, like in the school that I went to, you could choose between drama, so like, you know, being on stage, acting. We had a poetry, a subject that was called poetry, so you could write some poems if you had the talent to, which I didn't. But in any case, there's more of a choice, I think, in other countries. But in any case, that's... So, I'm always so proud of myself when I make it through one word without a spelling mistake. Subjects that you have to attend are compulsory subjects. So, of course, in Austria, all the main subjects, math, English, German, history, what else is there, geography, and so on and so forth. They are not voluntary, you have to go, and you'll always also get a grade on them. You may have seen some American movies about kids or teenagers who attend high school, and they would always be talking about subjects that they chose. So they don't really, like the American syllabus, the Lapland is way more flexible. In America, you can choose a bit more according to your preferences. So if you're really bad at maths or something, you don't really have to take it, but you can kind of combine different subjects in a way that suits you and your talents at the end of the day. In Austria, you can't. You have to basically oh, they are also called core subjects. In Austria, you basically have to do whatever like the syllabus says. There's not that much choice. As I said, in America, it's a bit more flexible. In England as well, but not to the same extent as it would be in the States. Something that was quite popular when I was in school. I'm not sure if Nachsitzen or if detentions or if getting detained is still like an appropriate punishment. Was it in your school? Did you have to Nachsitzen? No. Well.
We were in the same school.
Oh, true. I sometimes had to. Like, yeah. Well, there was something wrong with my class, obviously. So if you get detained or if you get detention, then you have to stay longer for an hour or 1.5 because you did something really stupid, which I hope none of you ever does. A word that we all know, but that we don't really know that we can use it in a school context as well, or not that much because it's become so much like standard language. If you get a 5 in our case, or an F in America, if you durchfallen in a test, in an exam, then you fail the test. The opposite one would be to pass a test, to pass the A-levels, to pass oral exams, to pass whatever. So you pass with flying colours, getting a 1, whatever, of course. Schulschwänzen. one of my favorite words in the world, if I could spell it. I just really like the word. The play truant is Schule schwänzen, so playing truant. Well, obviously, kind of becoming or turning into a problem in Austria, as the current government is discussing to implement fees for people who repeatedly decide to play truant in school. So the current government is kind of trying to elaborate like a system on how to punish people who miss a lot of, or who skip a lot of classes. So I guess playing truant was more fun when I was in school. Nobody noticed really. In most countries you have the option to attend the preschool. I think there's a difference between like the countries in terms of like the age when you can go to kindergarten and then to preschool in that case. In most countries, I think you go to preschool at the age of 5, 4, something like that. Do you? Yeah. There are countries in the world that kind of have compulsory kindergartens where the whole thing is then like kind of it's delayed. Everything's delayed a bit. But in any case, you always go to primary school. Primary school. So that's the most frequent word for Volksschule. The concept's the same in most countries, or at least the countries that we're going to discuss next week, because we're going to compare the school systems of America, the United Kingdom and Austria. It's called primary school everywhere, nevertheless. The sheets at the end of the year or in half term, where all your grades are on, is the report. So what we call it Zeugnis would be a report in most English-speaking countries. Also, as in the beginning, I think it's quite hard, like with the A-levels, to define our difference between Hauptschule or Neue Mittelschule, New Middle School, as it's called nowadays. It's quite hard to a person from an English-speaking background, because people in the Anglophone world, like their school system works a bit differently. So there's no clear distinction between secondary modern, secondary school, not secondary modern. So Hauptschule, or that's at least what most school books or what most English books, textbooks say, Hauptschule is something like secondary modern. So no why really. Whereas the gymnasium is called grammar school. I don't really know the origins of the word, but I suppose that in gymnasium you always had subjects like Latin and Old Greek, which were kind of related to grammar, and I suppose that's why it's called grammar school. I don't know, or that's an educated guess more than anything else. The Lehrplan, so the sheet of paper, or the many sheet of papers that the government produces, and to tell your teachers what to teach you. It's called the syllabus, a word that we're gonna need next week as well. And something that I find quite hard to translate usually, because taking the word that is in most of the books kind of gives you clueless faces when talking to a person, from England. But, okay, vocational, hard word. Vocational schools, especially in America, can be our concept of, or aren't really our concept of a Berufsschule, like the part that you go, or the part or the schooling that you do, like next to your apprenticeship, to your Lehre. Vocational schools in America are mainly schools that train you for a certain job, like the Adele and Hag do in our realms, really. So you would get like technical jobs, or you would go to a school where they teach you the basics of cooking, like where you learn how to work at receptions or tourism schools kind of thing. So that's the concept that the Americans have of a vocational school. Not sure about Britain. Explaining the concept of a Berufsschule, so the weeks or the month per year that you have to go to school. Besides your apprenticeship, I guess you would have to explain that, because that's a concept that is not, if you talk about vocational school, most people understand something different, really. The origin of the words, or a vocation, so only that part of the word, means Berufung, so that's the stuff that you're really good at, so I guess that kind of makes sense. That's what you want to do, and then you kind of decide to go to school. Well, you learn about that. Okay, let's have a look at the words. If I don't forget, I'll show you again next week. Chances are that's not that big, but... So, yeah, we're definitely going to need the word boarding school. That will definitely feature in my trial exams. Same with the compulsory subjects and the voluntary subjects. As we also talk about grading systems, you probably know that America doesn't have numbers but letters, and that there's differences in like giving grades in general. So we're going to talk about what you need to in order to bestehen, to pass in the school in England and America, and we'll also talk about the difference about the differences in age, like if there's any, like are there countries where you start school earlier than in Austria, and so on and so forth. Okay, let's have a quick look at some of the most important points in the questions, in the question how schools have changed. Probably talking about your my parents' generation, your parents' generation, grandparents' generation, so not that far back, but still. What definitely has changed is that there are stricter rules, or that there were stricter rules in school. Years ago, one of the stricter rules was that you were only allowed to speak when you were spoken to, so you would raise your hand if you knew something. The teacher would call your name, you'd have to stand up and then answer the questions and sit back down. So you were waiting the turn for speaking, so you couldn't just shout out if you knew the answer, which I think most people nowadays do, or I always did in school at least. So you really had to be addressed by the teacher by your name, and you had to be given the permission to be allowed to talk. You see that sometimes in older movies where the kids sit in school right from the start. I think they always had to do it also in primary school, so everything was a bit more like regulated. So the kids would stand up or would get up from their chairs, stand next to the table, and then answer the questions. Every now and then you still see that in old movies. That's something that has definitely changed. I had a look in the book that most of you guys out there are using, and there's this picture, quite frightening picture, of a cane, a Rohrstab. And the quite frightening concept of corporal punishment, die Bestrafung, so if you did something wrong, corporal something that has to do with your body. So in the past, teachers were obviously allowed to do physical harm to you when you did something wrong. I think the cane, the Rohrstab, has become kind of a metaphor for the whole thing. I don't know if it was always canes that were used. I know like the kind of more moderate version of a ruler. So teachers in the past, like in my grandparents' generation, they would kind of hit their pupils on the fingers with a ruler if they were chatting to their neighbors, forgot homework, whatever. Stuff that you are also not allowed to do anymore nowadays is tell people to stand in a corner. I think that was something that was quite popular for a while. Maybe not anymore in my generation, maybe my parents, not sure. So if you did something wrong, you just had to get up and stand in the corner, like thinking about bad actions that you did, kind of reflecting on them, and then kind of feel ashamed of yourself, kind of thing. I think the main aim was to, the teachers wanted to embarrass you, like you had to get up and stand in the corner of the classroom, which is maybe not the nicest feeling. What else was there? What else did people do? Yeah, nowadays, which might be a change as well, sometimes happened also during my school days, maybe not so much glad it also happened in her school days, not that old. You sometimes had to leave class with calm down a little and, walk around in school a bit, letting off steam kind of thing. You're not allowed to do that anymore because it has something to do with the teacher's responsibilities, because they're not allowed to leave you unsupervised. So I guess all of that, the cane, corporal punishment, and the corner actions, like where you had to stand in a corner, doesn't really happen anymore. Be it out of respect for the students, or because there was a change in like the teacher-student relationship kind of thing. So you're definitely not allowed to do that anymore. I guess one thing that has changed as well, I think nowadays we have this approach of the teachers and the students being equals kind of thing. So it's not that, you know, the teacher, of course, he or she will be the ones to grade your performances in the end, but then it's more of an equal relationship nowadays. I've also met teachers, especially in England, that would address you by your first name, and you would also be allowed to address them by their first name. So, which makes the whole power balance a bit more equal, I think, at the end of the day. Good, some general information on schooling, because I think that having additional information that was not in the book is always good, and I'll try and give you something to show off your great knowledge in the exams. Usually education is a state thing, so usually it's the states, the countries which are responsible for education. Education is compulsory in 95% of the countries in the world, so that means that 95% of the countries in the world have somewhere in their law a passage or a paragraph that says, well, all of our children have to go to school. So it's the parents' responsibility to send them. Depending on the country, I guess there's also systems. I think if you don't send your kid to school in Austria, the authorities will sooner or later show up at your doorstep and be like, okay, why is your kid not in school? That's of course different in other countries, but officially, as I said, 95% of the countries do have compulsory attendance in school, so you have to go. And most countries also have a minimum year of schooling that you have to do, but I guess in many countries these rules are not, you know, performed, or if there's no one to make sure that your kid really goes to school until he or she is 15, then, well, yeah. Well, the state also writes the syllabuses, which means that there's people in every country who sit down and kind of decide on what you have to know, and how the teachers have to teach you the contents that you have to know. I think that especially language learning has changed a lot. From what I know, learning English, for example, was very much like learning Latin a while ago. So you would always, you know, have to learn the rules by heart, and then all you ever did was translating stuff, and like always the same pattern. So you would have to translate 10 sentences that all feature, I don't know, a present perfect progressive tense, and that's what you did for an entire lesson or two. Hoping that you at the end of the day get the system of grammar. Something that is to some extent still done, I think, in like the old languages, Latin and Old Greek, because there's no, I don't know if there's any different way of teaching Latin or Greek really. But in modern languages, so English, Italian, Spanish, French, whatever you have to learn in school, or whatever you had to learn in school, nowadays we have a more like speech-based approach. The teachers would always try and make you speak for as much as possible. Yeah, I think that's what concerns education and the state's role. Well, there's centralized exams, not in all of the countries, of course. Some countries still don't have any regulations in terms of like final exams, in terms of A-levels. Austria does. The word Zentralmatura, well, we didn't have that until quite recently. So Austria did jump the bandwagon and was kind of trying to standardize final exams. So did England. So the final exams in England are standardized, not to such an extent as they are in Austria. So there would not be all of the pupils sitting down on the exact same date at the exact same hour. but the contents are sort of standardized, so we have that in England as well. School leaving age is different. In Austria, you have to have 9 years of schooling, depending on when you started, if you attended preschool or not. America and Canada, for example, they have, depending on the state or the province as it's called in Canada, you either go to school until the age of 16 or you go to or you have to go to school until the age of 18. As I said, in both countries, both in America and Canada, it's a state thing. So I don't know, the state of Mississippi can say, well, our kids go to school until 16, whereas the state of, I don't know, South Dakota says our kids have to go until they are 18. Same for Canada, where the whole thing is not so much divided into states or provinces, but language-wise. So the English or the English-speaking part of Canada would have different rules in terms of schooling than the French-speaking part. I think something that is new as well is a considerable increase of alternative approaches to traditional standard schooling. I think the Montessori approaches and the Waldorf approaches, so alternative schooling, no grades, no fixed subjects, and so on and so forth. We're going to talk about it next week. I think they're gaining in, maybe not gaining in importance, but definitely gaining in popularity. So there's demand for such school systems. Still some limits to them. I think you still can't take your final exams in either of the two types of schools. So you would have to, like, go to a regular school for your final exams for your A-levels if you wanted to study. So there's still, like, some infringements on regulations in both alternative approaches, but more of that next week. But I think, as I said, what has changed is that they have become more and more popular. Any changes that you can think of? Has anything changed apart from what I said?
I think you said pretty much everything.
I did not talk about the dates. I include dates, which I hardly ever do because I'm not able to remember them, and then I don't mention them. So corporal punishment, as I said, the cane and the ruler thing, was outlawed in the school system quite late. I think for a change, Austria was one of the, was quite early, 1970s is quite early compared to other countries, which is hardly ever happens in Austria. So corporal punishment was forbidden in the 1970s in Austria. Only in 1998 in Great Britain, and the Germans here kind of lag behind a little bit. In Germany, corporal punishment, so I don't know, hitting you on the fingers, was only forbidden in the year 2000, which doesn't mean the teacher still did it, but, well, that's what the law says. The law says, or I guess that the paragraph or the text passage in the law that said, well, you're allowed to physically punish your students was only eliminated in the year 2000, which doesn't mean, as I said, that the teachers did it. I don't think that anyone, or I hope that nobody resorts to such measures. Good. As one very brief last point, I'll try and give you, or I'll try to come back to it next week when there are the trial exams, because it's easier to actually tell you how to anticipate dialogues when you have like actual exam questions and also performance to analyze. So I'll only very quickly give you a couple of hints. So the dialogue is always based on the article. The monologue is basically based on your knowledge or on the bullet points that you have or on the knowledge that you have that gets activated by the bullet points. I guess that's what it is at the end of the day. So as for you to be able to kind of prepare the dialogue, which you can't really because maybe your interlocutor still says something or the examiner still says something that you haven't anticipated. But in order to be able to prepare a little, I would note down all of the arguments that the text raises or make a mind map of them. You don't necessarily, it's a really hard word, you don't have to talk about them, but it would be good if you had them on paper so that you kind of have a big pool of like ideas that you can kind of draw from, and that you can also steer the conversation, or you can also steer, kind of manipulate the conversation into such a direction. So, well, I guess the keywords are the quicker way, but for those of you who like to have something visualized, basically, you could also draw a mind map with all the aspects that the text mentions, that the article mentions, so that the interlocutor doesn't catch you unprepared. Also think about what you've learned in class or about the aspects that you've covered in class, and then you can kind of fill the gaps. So what is in the text and what do I know about the issue, and then you make some, you kind of combine them. Chances are that after that you've covered most of the aspects that there are to a topic, especially because usually teachers in class or the trainers in class will try to give you as much input as they can and provide you with as many ideas and aspects as they can. I would also activate my own knowledge, like the knowledge that you have, and prior to an exam you should also definitely sit down in front of your computers and kind of look what is out there. I think I've mentioned the current examples quite frequently. A current example in the topic schooling would, for example, be the fines or the fees that kids have to pay, or rather the parents have to pay for playing truant. That would be a current example. You might not have covered that in class because it's not in the school books. The school books are never that up to date. So these are basically the three kind of angles, the three possibilities that you have. You have the article, you have what you've like information that you kind of gathered yourself, that you kind of compiled and collected yourself. Yeah. Why do I? Oh yeah, my example. I just couldn't make any sense of my example. I mentioned the vocational schools earlier. So that is schools that not every country has, maybe. So you could kind of fill in or prepare something that is a little bit special. In Austria, we have a school that is mainly for business and that covers subjects like accounting and bookkeeping and so on and so forth, which most schools don't, like in a standard grammar school or in whatever school you go to, like regular standard school. In England you go to, you wouldn't cover stuff like that. So you could point that out as something special, something that makes the Austrian school system stick out from all the others. Could explain all that depending on how much time you have. Yeah, so as I said, you have your that moment when you want to highlight something and can't. You have your article, which should, if it is a well-chosen article, should give you most of the information. Class, so fill the gaps. It's kind of the breach, the connection between the knowledge that you have and what the article says, and some extra information that is kind of outside of both the article and what you did in school. Your own knowledge, your own experiences. Sometimes, depending on the topic, you could also add experiences. I will very quickly show you an old exam. So I think that was a trial exam we did a fortnight ago or 3 weeks ago. Can't really remember. So you always have a text. In this case, you have a link to the text, which I can't really show you the text because that would infringe copyright and so on and so forth. But in the text, it's called How to Become More Tolerant. It basically mentions some points like talk to strangers kind of thing, watch movies or series or documentaries that kind of broaden your horizon, that give you information about other cultures, read books, read newspapers, read good newspapers, that kind of give you the truth about multicultural societies, about immigrants, about refugees, whatever. But it, for example, the text So the How to Become More Tolerant text does not talk about the role of school. So is it the teacher's task to kind of make their pupils a more tolerant society kind of thing? So you could add that. That's what I mean in like adding additional information. Take what is there in the text, all the points that I've mentioned now, and add what you think is important. Like, for example, the teachers and the school, and maybe also social media. Like, does it help? Like, if you are a really nice person, kind of thing, and you spread your ideas and your opinions on the topic of tolerance, discrimination, racism, whatever. If you spread your ideas on the internet, does it change something? Yes or no? So that would be like the teachers and you and your own stance towards the topic. That would be additional information that you could give. Okay, my exam's gone. Yeah, so I think that's how you can how I think you could anticipate questions for the dialogue. As I said, I will try and include all that into next week's exams because, as I said, it's easier. So I will kind of try and give you some information or fill in the gaps of the information that Timna maybe does not give you, but that is there, so as to kind of show you what I mean by all that. So yeah, that was a good link to next week in that case. So it will be trial exam time. You will see 2 different exams covering the aspect of schooling. So I guess one of the exams will be about the different school systems, because I know that they can sometimes be a little tricky. Talking about a school system that you have not gone through, that you've not attended, can be quite hard, I think. And the other one will probably be about alternative approaches, so an evaluation of Montessori education and Waldorf schools. A short explanation of what they are, what the obstacles are, what the advantages are. I think that's the plan for next week. Thank you very much. See you next week. Good night.